I'm Tejas. I'm an engineer at Segment, and I'm going to be talking about gRPC today. So that was actually me giving a talk when I was just 17 years old. So at the age of 15, I actually interned as a software engineer at HubSpot. A year later, I joined Segment, a super small but fast-growing startup in Silicon Valley, as a full-time software engineer after high school at the age of 16. And a handful of years later, the company was acquired for $3.2 billion, and I went off to start my own startup. And today I'm 24 years old and the founder of a startup that's been valued at $600 million. So how did I get into coding? I wanted to take a bit to talk about my story, getting into software and startups and all of this stuff. So, it really goes back to the 4th or 5th grade when I really wanted to just learn how to build a website. I was super fascinated by the idea of websites and going on the web and, being able to play games or explore this huge wealth of content. And I wanted to know how to make a website myself. I remember the most early versions of playing around with code and web development was actually, for me, I learned that you could go on a Word document and export it as HTML and actually open that in your browser and you had like a little bit of a website. But I wanted to learn how real websites were made and how to really do, web development and software stuff. So I did some Googling. I learned how to build websites for fun using websites like W3 Schools was the big resource back then, and just cobbling things together in Notepad and reopening it in Google Chrome. And as things went on, I just became really fascinated and obsessed with this idea of being able to build software, whether it was a website or a game or a program or a mobile app. Later on, I developed some apps for my school or different clubs in our local community. But the big inflection point of my whole journey to finally becoming a full-time software engineer was actually getting the chance to code with others. The first time I really got to code with others for a long period of time was when I scored this unpaid internship. Actually, it was completely free. I wasn't getting paid at a local startup in Tennessee where I grew up. And I got the internship actually just by, stumbling across this startup in a newspaper, actually back then, and seeing that some article around the lines of Nashville startup goes to Silicon Valley and comes back after going to like an incubator over there. And they were going through a program called 500 Startups, which is pretty similar to Y Combinator and programs like that, except probably not quite as prestigious. And I actually reached out to them and I just said, hey, I'm a local high school student. I'm in the 9th grade. I'm looking for something to do over the summer and I love to code and I love the opportunity to just come in and do some work for free. Since it was free, they pretty much immediately took me up on it, which was awesome. I'm super, super thankful for the founders of that company in terms of taking a bet on me and letting me join for the summer and really learn from them. And this was a huge inflection point to learning how to code. Before then, I didn't really know how to use tools like Git or GitHub. I didn't know really how to collaborate on software development. I didn't know how to organize my code to be clean and friendly for other people to work on it, or how to navigate a big code base. I'd really only worked on code that I had written versus, a larger piece of software. It was a website builder, so it's pretty complicated that many people had been contributing to over the course of years. And it was a huge inflection point for my learning. Using the technique of fold outbounding, I found a variety of different opportunities. I got to go to some hackathons that were developed for college kids as a high school student by just shooting over some emails. I got an internship at HubSpot the following year by connecting to a bunch of people on LinkedIn. And finally, after all these internships and just fun doing software and programming, I thought it would be really awesome to get creative and figure out how to graduate high school early so that I could take a gap year and actually go work in Silicon Valley before finally going to college. So that's where Segment comes in. Back when I was at the first startup in my free unpaid internship, there was this tool that we used as a website builder company called segment.io. And what it did was super simple. Just like many startups, we wanted to analyze our customer behavior. And to do this, we wanted to use tools like Mixpanel and Amplitude and Google Analytics, and Kissmetrics was another of the tools back then. And in order to do that, we needed to send data from our websites about what people were doing on them to those services. But as a developer, you didn't want to integrate each of these services individually, and you also wanted to try all of them because they were all new early stage startups with different pros and cons. So Segment was the way to do that. You would put their library on your website and boom, all the data that you were collecting on your website would now be going to 5, 10, or 20 or 50 tools and hundreds of tools versus just one system at a time. I thought that value proposition was really fascinating, and I started following the company actually all the way back from my internship. Saw them a little bit on Hacker News with all the open source projects and cool technical blogs they were putting out. Saw them releasing new projects and new large rounds of funding. And when I decided that I wanted to try working in Silicon Valley, they were one of the first companies that I actually reached out to. So I already had some familiarity with the Segment folks from contributing to open source, which was also a big catalyst for my software engineering knowledge as a kid or student. And Segment had a lot of popular open source projects, especially in the JavaScript community, which I became pretty active in. The meetup that we showed earlier was actually a Node.js meetup that I spoke at later when I came to San Francisco. And working at Segment just seemed like the dream. So I decided to shoot them over a cold email saying, hey, I've been following the company for so long. I have these skill sets. I actually have been contributing to open source projects by Segment and would love to get a chance to interview there. And again, cold emails shined. It's a process that I highly recommend. I have the craziest stories of people responding on cold emails. They actually let me get an interview. The funniest part was, in this whole process of reaching out, I didn't actually disclose that I was 16 years old or a high school student or thinking about this whole gap year shenanigans. From my experience, I found that, usually introduced more barriers than advantages, even though obviously you can't discriminate around age. If you're 16, you don't have a college degree, you don't have much experience. And a lot of these startups especially are looking to hire more experienced folks. So I put different contract positions I had and, showed those in a fancy way on my resume. I removed all the education sections. I think someone probably just assumed I went to a college that I wasn't super proud of. I said I was in Tennessee, but willing to move to San Francisco. And I went through some of the interview process all under that sort of context. And eventually they actually asked me for my date of birth in order to book some flights for me to come to San Francisco for the onsite, where I would meet the rest of the team and do about 5 interviews in person over the course of a day. And at that point, I basically got an email back from Segment asking me, is it legally allowed for me to work? They were happy, they were excited to interview me from an interview perspective based on what I'd shown, but had no idea whether it was even possible to hire me at the company or what I was looking for. Eventually, we worked through all the legal sort of stuff. I had done a ton of research online and found out that California was actually super flexible with regards to kids wanting to graduate early and start working early and stuff like that. You can actually get a job in California as long as you have a high school diploma or graduation of some sort. I ended up getting the job at Segment after all this course of interviews. Again, super thankful for that to them for taking, and the founders especially, for taking a bet on me at such a young age. When I got the offer letter from Segment, I was in awe. This was my ticket to Silicon Valley. It's actually one of the first offers I got after reaching out to tons and tons of companies and interviewing at them. And the craziest part was, as a 16-year-old who hadn't made much money in the past, this was actually a full-time job with a full-time salary of $110,000 a year. Never thought that moment would come. A normal 16-year-old would probably, sign this offer as soon as possible and just jump on the opportunity. As the kind of entrepreneurial spirit person I was, I ended up trying to apply to more and more companies and negotiate a bit. But all in all, I ended up joining Segment, and I would say that really changed the course of my career and my experience in software and startups and building a business and moving to San Francisco and just being exposed to the whole tech community. It was absolutely a game changer. If you're in a similar situation or know someone who is, first off, feel free to reach out to me. I love talking to, young folks on their journey into software engineering, or even folks that are, transitioning careers or anything like that. My top 3 tips broadly would be, 1, there's an insane amount of good online content out there. When I was growing up, I felt that way. And now looking at the content and games and courses and stuff like Code Academy that exists today, it's just crazy. Learning to be a software engineer or program has never been easier than it is today, and I think GPT probably just made that a lot easier actually. 2, find a way to work with others, even if you're not going to get paid for it. Like if it's an unpaid internship or helping a local business out with something, just find a way to work with others. Every time I got a chance to work with others and code with others, that was a huge inflection point into my learning. Just put yourself out there. There will always be opportunities out there that aren't listed that you can create. And I think that's a recurring theme through my experience. No startup was out there saying they would hire people out of high school. All the applications mentioned having to have a college degree. No internship was out there at a public company like HubSpot built for high school students. I just connected with folks on LinkedIn and removed education from my resume and did all these sort of tricks. And lastly, I just started contributing to open source projects that were out there in various communities by various companies as well.